All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a huge question today, one that's at the heart of pretty much any creative project. Should you follow a strict set of rules, or is it better to trust your messy, unpredictable intuition? We're going to explore this clash and figure out what it tells us about how great ideas actually come to life.
I mean, really think about it. How are groundbreaking ideas made? You see a brilliant piece of research or an amazing new product, and you have to wonder, right? Was that some sudden flash of genius, or was it the result of a super meticulous step-by-step plan?
You know, the common wisdom says that for anything big or complex, you need a formula, you need a checklist, a recipe that guarantees you'll get a good result. But what if that's not really the full story? What if the reality is a whole lot messier and, frankly, a lot more interesting?
Okay, so first, let's explore the rules side of the debate. And there's no better example than the work of scholar Rick Szostak. He actually tried to create a definitive recipe for one of the most complicated things you can study: interdisciplinary work.
So Szostak laid out this really logical, multi-step process. You start with a question, you identify what's going on, you do your homework. It's a perfectly rational roadmap. It feels safe, right? It feels predictable and correct. But the real question is it how discovery actually happens? And right on cue, here comes our counterpoint. Another scholar, Linn Mackey, took one look at this neat little recipe and basically said, hold on a second, that's not how it works at all. Mackey was convinced this rule-based approach just didn't capture the reality of it, and he had a very personal story to prove his point.
And this is where the story gets really, really good. We're going to look at Mackey's own experience writing an actual academic paper. He calls it the fractals or fish story. And honestly, it's the perfect showcase for a process that's messy, intuitive, and in the end, totally brilliant.
So, where did this big project begin for Mackey? Was it with Szostak's Step 1, a nice, neutral question? Nope, not even close. It started when he read an article by a guy named Stanley Fish, who argued that true interdisciplinary work was basically impossible. For Mackey, this felt like a personal threat. So the whole thing kicked off with an emotional gut reaction, not a calm, analytical question. Now, what happened next was even less logical. While he's stewing on this, a phrase just appears in his head: fractals or fish. And why did he stick with it? He literally says he just liked the alliterative sound of it. That's it. This catchy little phrase that just popped into his head became the weird guiding mantra for his entire research project.
Just look at the comparison. Mackey's actual process completely ignored the checklist. He didn't search for methods, he just went with chaos theory and fractals because he was already into them. He didn't do a big literature survey, he just focused on one book. He pretty much skipped all the key steps, he threw the rule book out the window.
So here's the crucial point. His real driving force wasn't some logical plan. It was this weird intuitive mantra that, in his words, goaded him on. It was like an internal creative compass, not an external roadmap somebody gave him. And that is the core of an intuition-based process.
And this is where that silly-sounding mantra led to a huge breakthrough. Mackey realized the two sides were thinking in completely different geometries. The critic, Fish, was thinking about ideas like they were simple shapes, squares and circles, totally separate. But Mackey saw that interdisciplinary thinking is more like a fractal, like a snowflake, a complex, interconnected pattern. This single insight changed the whole debate.
And there's a perfect word for this kind of breakthrough: emergence. It's what happens when something totally new and unexpected pops up from mixing different ideas, in this case, literary theory and fractal geometry. And here's the thing about emergence. You can't script it. You can't put it on a checklist. It just has to, well, emerge. But look, this isn't just one scholar's quirky story. It turns out this whole rules versus intuition debate reflects a massive identity crisis happening in what we think of as our most logical field, science itself. So you might be thinking, okay, fine, Mackey is messy, Szostak likes lists. Is this just about personal style? Well, Mackey would argue absolutely not. There's something way more fundamental going on here, something that has totally reshaped how we even think about knowledge.
For a long, long time, we saw science through the lens of logical positivism. That's the super rigid, step-by-step scientific method we all learned in school. But then a new view called post-positivism came along and said, whoa, hold on. Real science is way more creative. It's driven by hunches, by imagination, and by messy breakthroughs, not some clean checklist.
This huge shift was led by some brilliant thinkers. You had Polanyi, who talked about all the gut knowledge scientists have that they can't even write down. You had Popper, who said great ideas can come from anywhere, a hunch, a dream, whatever. And Kuhn, who showed that science doesn't just inch forward, it makes these huge, messy, revolutionary leaps. And this quote from Kuhn is just the knockout punch. He's basically saying that a great scientist's skill can be understood without having to pretend they're following some secret rulebook. It's about their experience, their practice, and their intuition.
So here's where we connect all the dots. Mackey's big argument is this. If science, our poster child for logic and rules, is actually a deeply intuitive and creative process, then something as wild and boundary-crossing as interdisciplinary work must be even more reliant on intuition, not less.
So, what does this all mean for us? For anyone trying to build something or solve a problem? How do we balance these two forces, rules and intuition, in our own work? Let's wrap this up with some practical takeaways.
Now, to be super clear, Mackey is not saying rules are useless. Not at all. They're incredibly helpful, but we've been thinking about their role all wrong. They're not a guide for during the messy, creative part. They are a post hoc check, a fantastic tool for reviewing and refining your work after the big intuitive leap has already happened.
You could think of it like this. Intuition is the engine of discovery. It's the 90% of the work that gets you into brand new territory. And the rules? They are the critical final check, that last 10%, to make sure everything is solid once you've arrived. You need both, but they do very different jobs.
And here is a final, fascinating little secret. It turns out that scientific papers are often a kind of, well, fiction. They're written to look perfectly clean and logical, like the scientist followed the recipe to a T. But the real journey of discovery was almost always as messy and intuitive as Mackey's fractals or fish story.
And this all leads to Mackey's big final suggestion. What if we were all just more honest about this stuff? What if creators and thinkers actually shared the winding, messy, intuitive paths they took to get where they were going? We could all learn so much more from the real story, not just the polished, cleaned-up version.
And that's a thought I really want to leave you with. Just imagine the new ideas, the new connections, the new confidence we could all find if we just embraced and shared the messy reality of how things get made. What might we all unlock if we valued our intuition just as much as our plans? Thanks for digging into this with me.